Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Lapre.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, episode number 6. Hey, thanks for coming back and hanging out with me today. As always, I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm your host, Kim Lapre from teachersneedteachers.com, a coaching and community site for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. Now, this is the last part of a 4-part series on reflecting on your previous school year. And this works whether or not you were a student teacher or if you were in the classroom within your first few years of teaching. Previously in episodes, we covered your classroom setup, your grading, and your policies and procedures. And today we are talking all about classroom management. Yes, my friends, classroom management is a biggie, and it's one that actually a lot of new teachers struggle with those first few years. So we're not going to be talking so much about classroom management techniques, but rather reflecting on what we've done and the foundations that we've set to promote better classroom management. Classroom management goes hand in hand with procedures. So if you didn't get a chance to listen to episode number 5, where we reflect on our policies and procedures and how we taught those, I encourage you to go back to that one because it's going to be perfect with this particular episode. So when students fail to follow those expected procedures and rules, there needs to be a natural progression of consequences that should take place that still help a student maintain their dignity while learning right from wrong. And without clear and concise rules and a clear understanding of those consequences, the chances of student misbehavior and misunderstandings increase. So let's start with your classroom rules. Now, you've probably heard by now that it's better to have rules that are stated in the positive. So you don't want a classroom rule that says, don't chew gum, or don't do this and don't do that. You want about 5 to maybe 7 rules at the most. I'd like to keep them down to a minimum, but you want these rules to be listed as positive behaviors, such as respect others, keep your hands to yourself, use appropriate language. And within those general rules, then little rules can apply as well. So saying respect others means don't touch other people's belongings, don't talk out of turn. Just want them so that pretty much anything that happens in your class can fall within these 5 to 7 rules. And there's lots of resources on different rules. I'm sure when you were student teaching, or maybe even your colleagues, they have their own sets of rules. I'm someone who likes to talk to other teachers and see what they're using and then try to figure out how I can cater that to my particular philosophy. And this part is really important because classroom management is very personal in the sense that you're going to have to be consistent in terms of enforcing it. And so if you have a rule or a policy that you can't get behind, but you're thinking, well, so-and-so does it and their classroom runs really well, you're never really going to own that rule. So it's best to think about who you are and what your philosophical beliefs are in terms of how to teach students to properly behave, and then cater your rules around that. Think about what an ideal classroom looks like, and what are the behaviors of the students, what could go wrong, and what are the natural consequences of those negative behaviors. With your classroom rules, you also want to think about school rules. Now, these are non-negotiable. If it's school policy, you have to follow it. So, for example, maybe your school has a rule about tardies. Maybe if students are tardy to class, they're required to go to some sort of detention. Now, if that is a school policy, you're going to need to uphold that whether or not you believe that that's right. You want to think about what are your rules and how do they align with the school rules. In addition to rules, you want to think about what we call progressive discipline. So basically, it's where as students misbehave, the consequences progress with each infraction. So the first time that they talk out of turn, you're not necessarily going to call home. You can just imagine how annoying that would be for the student, how time-consuming that would be for you, and also it would be time-consuming and annoying for the parent if you called home every time their student talked out of turn. That would also make it look like you don't know how to handle your class. The purpose of progressive discipline isn't to punish the students, it's to train them to behave properly. You have to teach these students how to behave. And I know that seems obvious that you should behave in class, but let's be real. It's not going to happen consistently. Therefore, when you use progressive discipline, you're going to start small. You're going to use a look or a nonverbal warning, maybe proximity. And you're going to do that a few times. The point is to train them to behave properly. You could just automatically give them a harsh punishment, but the problem is that then you have to ask yourself, does the punishment fit the crime? If a student yells out an answer without raising their hand and you assign them detention, what does that show them? It basically shows them that you're unreasonable, and I don't think that that's something that you want to do. The best way to do this is to train them to raise their hand by giving them a look, by ignoring them, by standing near them and letting somebody else answer. And after a while, they're going to learn that yelling the answer out loud is not going to help. If anything, after a while, if they do this, say, 4 or 5 times, then you're going to give them a verbal warning. If they still don't listen, then you're going to keep them after class and you're going to have a talk with them. But again, the purpose of progressive discipline is to train students how to behave and give them an opportunity to improve. Now, when all else fails and students aren't getting the message, then we have consequences. There are consequences that are school and district policies as well as your own. For example, at some schools, you can assign an in-school suspension for certain infractions. Or maybe you have your own detention that you hold for certain misbehaviors and infractions. Then there are more severe consequences, such as being suspended from school, or even being expelled. And you want to also be familiar with those consequences, even if you don't plan on using them at all. It's still good to know what the school policy is, because you don't want to be non-compliant because you're not following these policies. Plus, a parent can complain that you didn't assign a certain consequence, but another teacher did, and this could be something that causes problems both at your site level and at the district. So I want to step back here for a minute and talk about the bigger picture of classroom management. As I mentioned before, it starts with clearly communicated policies and procedures. And when I say clearly communicated, I mean to both the students and the parents. But a huge part of this is building relationships with your students. It's not about being a strict disciplinarian, but on the other hand, it's not about trying to be their best friend so that they'll listen to you. There's a balance there that you have to maintain. Students don't necessarily have to like you, but it sure helps in terms of getting them to buy in, especially if you're teaching really dry and boring content. I mean, let's be honest, there's some of that in every single subject area. But when you have the buy-in from the students because of the relationships that you've established, you're going to find yourself with far fewer behavior problems. So I wouldn't think about using classroom management as a way of scaring the kids into behaving. You want them to want to behave because they want to be in your classroom and they want to learn. And that's something that takes time, obviously, but if you build those relationships, it's going to be a lot less difficult to accomplish. So I want you to think about that, about the type of personality that you have. If you're someone who's a little bit on the drier and maybe stoic side, you might have to find other ways to engage the students so that you can build those relationships with them. And if you're someone who tends to be sillier and animated, you're going to have an easier time getting those kids to buy into what you're doing. And I'm just giving you the honest truth. Teachers who tend to be a little bit on the more serious side, they could still get students who behave, but at the same time, it's so much easier if students like you. And of course, you have to take into consideration the grades that you teach. The kind of personality that you need to be an elementary school teacher is actually pretty different from a high school teacher. So let's put all of these 4 episodes together to get the bigger picture here. So we talked about your classroom setup, and just realize that your classroom setup can change. You could completely rearrange your desks and your setup at any time. It just really depends on the amount of effort that you want to put into it. And while you're doing these arrangements, you want to think about students and traffic and what are some of the problems that could happen as a result of your layout. If you have students facing each other, are they also able to see you, or are they going to be distracted by each other? Or if you have your main center where you keep all your supplies, it's in an area that's high traffic, is that going to create a bottleneck and chaos that's going to take up time? Also, in the beginning of the year, you're going to want to really explicitly lay out your grading policies and other policies and procedures to the kids. Even at the semester, you're going to want to go over your grading policies with the students so they remember how you're grading them. A lot of times they forget over winter break, and it really pays to go over it so that looking forward to second semester, they can make a plan to improve. And same things with your policies and procedures. It never, ever hurts to reteach them or reiterate them to your students, especially when you see a lot of your students not following those policies and procedures. And then again, like I said, that goes with the classroom management. So when they're not following a rule or a policy, are you consistent about enforcing the progressive discipline? Or do you let it go for some students, for the ones that you like more? And do you tend to catch the ones who tend to misbehave more often and maybe you just don't like them as much? So all of these go together in terms of a really well-run classroom, which is why it's really good to go back and reflect on how you ran your classroom last year. And you'll realize over the summer, as you're enjoying your time off and every once in a while your brain wanders back to your classroom, you start to get these new ideas about what you can do to improve. As you come across Pinterest, or you read blogs, or you go to professional development, or hang out with your teacher friends, because you took the time to reflect on what happened in your classroom last year, it gives you sort of this foundation for how you're going to build on that or change it up. So I know that, again, this is not the time when you feel like doing this, but you're really going to see the benefits when it's back to school time. So if you're ready to sit down and do this, I encourage you to grab my resource if you haven't already. You can go to teachersneedteachers.com/6 and you can go and sign up for the resource there. And it goes through all 4 of these past episodes with classroom setup, grading, policies and procedures, and classroom management. So you can take the time to get your reflections down on paper, and then you can come back to them later when it's time to plan for back to school. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. I hope this reflection series has been valuable for you. I really hope that you take the time to go back, review your policies. And if you'd like to discuss or ask any questions about anything in these episodes, you can head on over to my Facebook group by searching Teachers Need Teachers in Facebook, or you can also go to teachersneedteachers.com/FB, which is in the lowercase. And of course, I really hope that you'll take the time to subscribe to my podcast, as well as go to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. It does help me create better episodes, but more importantly, it helps this podcast become more discoverable so that new and beginning teachers can find it and get value from it. And I really hope that you feel comfortable enough to ask me any questions or any suggestions for how I can make this podcast better. And if you're interested in being a guest, I would love to feature you. You can email me at kim@teachersneedteachers.com. Have a great day and a great summer.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.